So I spent the vast majority of 2017 wanting to commit suicide. Okay, that's a rough way to start a sermon. I get that. It's sort of chucking the baby in the deep end of the pool. Totally get that. Maybe we should have eased into that, little toe in the water, something. Totally could have. Also, I get it. Like, I've been accused of oversharing in my day over the years. Some people, I don't know if you should have said that in a sermon. If that's you, I'm going to go ahead and apologize up front, because this is probably going to be the world's greatest overshare, if you haven't noticed. So, spent most of 2017 wanting to kill myself. And you know what's interesting, because being myself, I actually didn't notice that it was that big of a deal at first. You see, I can't remember a time in my life, going back to when I was like 10, 11, 12, at all, being a cognizant human being, where I didn't have like pretty severe anxiety and weird, odd emotional issues and stuff. And I can't really remember a time where I didn't know what the word depression meant, you know, in the sense of sometimes I have depression. Like, I've always known that. That's just always been a part of me. But the thing about it was, for years, like decades, you know, it'd come on, and then it'd go away, and then it'd show up, and then it'd go away, and it'd show up, and it'd go away. You know, like your family at the holidays, and you're glad when, you know, they leave. Family at the holidays. It's sort of how this was. You know, it'd show up, and I'd be like, okay, cool, I feel terrible, whatever, and then it went away. And even like some of the suicidal thoughts, you know, that happened when I was a teenager, and, you know, it's amazing how easy it was for it to go away. You know, I'm 15, 16, and you have these thoughts, and you talk to your friends, and then it goes away. And so I just sort of thought, okay, well, I'm, you know, in my 30s now. It's just going to be the same as it's always been. And so kind of towards the end of 2016, going into 2017, started having these thoughts, having this depression. Didn't tell anybody because, you know, we're all ashamed of you know, the way that our brains work. If it was, you know, a heart disease, I totally would have told somebody. But it's in my brain, so I tell no one. And I just figured, okay, it's going to go away. But a funny thing happened. It didn't go away. It was weird. It just didn't go away. And so I kept thinking, this is going to be a thing that's it's going to work itself out. It'll work itself. I remember distinctly thinking, okay, well, this is just going to have to be the worst, because, you know, I'm going through like every day like this, and I, you know, I don't want this, obviously, but this will be the worst it is. Everybody's got to have a worst, right? If sometimes you're depressed, you've got to have a worst depressed time, right? Just like a best depressed. It's usually not best. So that's sort of just what I thought was, this is what'll happen. But by the time the summer hit, a good day for me was just wanting to not be alive at all. And a bad day for me was figuring out ways I could do it where Stephanie wouldn't find my body, because I didn't want her to have to do that. I had lots of ways, by the way, on that. But I still thought, okay, well, this is going to go away. I'll be happy. It'll fix itself. My brain is dumb, but it'll fix itself. But what was really kind of a crystallizing moment for me was in the middle of 2017, the last July, I guess it was, when I went on a cruise to do a wedding. Now, I went on this cruise to the Bahamas with some people I love absolutely dearly to do a wedding, which means a few different things. First of all, this is in the Bahamas. You hear a lot of times people talk about something being like an island paradise. Guess what? The Bahamas are like an island paradise, because the Bahamas are an island paradise. It's the most beautiful place I've ever been in my life. It was incredible. And I love the ocean. I'm not one of those Midwest folks. It's like, I don't want to see the ocean ever because, you know, it should be on land. That's not me. Like, I love the ocean. I love being in with the water. It's great. So for me, like, that wasn't depressing at all in any way. Also, I was there with people that I love. I was there with people that I'm going to be friends with for the rest of my life. I was doing a wedding for people I will be friends with for the rest of my life. I was there hanging out with people that I will be friends with for the rest of my life. I was meeting people that I will be friends with for the rest of my life. That's not depressing. And I was doing a wedding, which, okay, like, I don't love weddings. But I've known I wanted to be a preacher since I was like 14. Doing weddings, to me, like, a wedding is a holy, sacred occasion. Like, for me, that is something that is more than just part of my job. It's part of a calling. And that's not depressing. every part of this situation, this cruise with people that I love, that doing a wedding, all of that is the opposite of depressing. And yet the entire cruise, I kept having to escape every day, different times, to go hide somewhere to cry. And I realized this is not normal. This is not just me being Drew the weirdo that's always been. So when we arrived back to Missouri, I told Stephanie what was going on. And she said, okay, well, we need to do something. Like, you've got to get help. And I agreed to get help. And then 3 months later, because I'm late at everything, I went and got help. Can't even start church on time. I'm not going to go get help on time. So 3 months later, I go and get some help. And it sounds weird. Like, it sounds like a strange thing. But, like, I can't tell you how much I loved going to the psychiatrist. Because here's what happened. I ended up talking to this lady. She's an amazing lady. And if anybody needs a psychiatrist, I got a lady for you. She's absolutely amazing. And I remember talking to her about different things. And we talked a lot. And we had a few different sessions. And then she finally kind of, at the end of one of them, she said, hey, I'm pretty sure a few things are going on. I'm pretty sure you're bipolar, which I thought, well, that totally makes sense. You see, one of the ways that I've always been able to good at hiding this stuff is because I don't just have the one, I got the other. I swing back and forth. And most people know me as Drew, the super happy, gregarious, hyper guy who's off the wall all the time. That's how people know me, because that's what I let people see. I just don't go around people when I'm on the other side. So it totally made sense. And she said, okay, it's real simple. You're going to come to appointments. You're going to take some medicine. And you're going to change some things about your lifestyle. And that'll be that. That's our plan of attack. Things should get better. And I remember, like, it's weird to say, getting a diagnosis of something I'm still rather ashamed of in many ways, even though I know I shouldn't be, but I still am. I remember, like, getting this diagnosis and it being one of the happiest moments of my life. Because it was like, well, first of all, not only am I not going to kill myself, which I didn't really want to, even though I wanted to. Really weird explanation with the way my brain works. But not only am I going to, stay alive, but I may not have to go through these horrible months of being depressed and then these swings of I don't sleep for 2 months on end and, because I'm super manic. And maybe we can keep things, somewhere in between. And I remember thinking that. And I remember it just being elated and joyful and ecstatic that this is going to be something for me that's going to fix stuff. And I share this with you. I overshare this information with you to get to this point. As excited as I was, it wasn't a fix. It's funny, I started this by saying I spent most of 2017 wanting to kill myself. I've spent some of 2018 wanting to kill myself, which is much less than most. Absolutely. We've got improvements. But it's not fixed. And the swings back and forth, not fixed. Now, I have tools at my disposal to help me. I have regular appointments that really, truly help. I have medicine that really, truly helps. I have some plans of attack here, some lifestyle changes that really and truly help. But it's funny, this thing I was so excited about, in the moment where I knew, man, this is going to be fixed. It wasn't a fix. I'm not fixed. It was like you hear new year, new you. Well, this was new year, same Drew. And so here we are, struggling to get by every day. It's better. It's not fixed. And I say this, I get to that point, because there's this principle that we need to understand, especially this time of year. Life does not have quick fixes. Life does not have Band-Aids that cover a situation and make all the pain go away. It's not the way it is. We want that. We want the quick fix. We want the genie in the bottle, okay? We want the magic beans. We want something, okay, I do this. This is why, by the way, pyramid schemes work like that. This is why diet pills work like that. This is why, most of the world makes money off of us, right? They're saying, hey, do this thing and everything will be fixed like tomorrow. That's not the way the real world works. And it's also not the way real faith works. Being a Christian does not mean, okay, I believe in Jesus, or I accept Jesus, or I get baptized into Jesus, or whatever, and therefore my problems go away. Therefore my doubts go away. Therefore my struggles go away. It's not the way it is. And it's important that we say that going into Christmas. Because I got to tell you, there is so much we are going to be hit by over the next month that is going to tell us it's a holly jolly Christmas. It's the best time of the year. I don't know the rest of the song. But Santa Claus is coming. And then all the Christian Jesus-y people are going to be like, well, it's Jesus who's the reason for the season. And they're not wrong. They're a little obnoxious, but they're not wrong. Well, so because Jesus was born, how could you possibly be sad? I don't know, because it's life. Because we have this idea, and it preaches well, and churches get packed to the gills by people who say, believe in Jesus and things will be okay. But that's not the way it is. That's not the way it's ever been. And in fact, that's not even the way the Christmas story goes. Let me tell you about some of my favorite characters, not just of the Christmas story, but in the entire Bible. It's the shepherds that are outside of Bethlehem on the very first Christmas, the night Jesus was born. So here's the deal. To be an Israelite shepherd was to live in a world of madness. First century Israelite shepherds. Absolutely crazy life. Some of that is because they were Israelite. Some of that is because they were just Jewish people living in the first century. That's because they were living not in their own country, exactly. Like, it was their country, but it was an occupied country. And as much as we hear this, I'm not sure we actually hear this. So, like, if you live in an occupied country in Israel, what that means is that your king is the Caesar. You're a monotheistic person, you're Jewish, but that Caesar claims he's divine, which goes against your religious faith, your entire cultural ideology, and everything that has made you as a human being. The very fact this guy is your king goes against everything you want to be as a person. And so not only do you have the Caesar, but then you have Roman governors. And then because they try to pacify the people, now you have Hebrew leaders who are loyal not to you, but to Romans. This is who you have to follow. If they say jump, you have to say how high. If they say go to your ancestral land for a census, you put your 8-month-old wife on a donkey and you travel. Because you have to. There are no other options. And by the way, there are no elections coming. You don't vote your leaders in or out. It's not how this works. There are no elections. There is no vote that you can campaign for. You can protest, and you know what they'll do? They'll kill you. So that leaves one thing. You have no rights. You have nothing. That leaves absolutely one thing you can do. You can rebel. You can resist. You can become terrorists. And many Hebrew people did. They rebelled and they resisted and they became terrorists. I mean, we would not call them terrorists. We'd call them zealots, maybe. One of Jesus' disciples was a zealot. We wouldn't call him a terrorist because we know that Rome is the bad guy. But in the world in which Rome is control of everything, they're not the bad guy. So the Jews are terrorists. The problem, though, is this. It's kind of like the world they live in is sort of like Star Wars. We've all seen Star Wars, and if you haven't, how dare you? We've all seen Star Wars, you know? Now imagine Star Wars without Luke Skywalker. Imagine Star Wars without any Jedi. Imagine Star Wars where instead of Jedi Luke Skywalker flying towards the Death Star and blowing it up, the replacement for Luke Skywalker flies towards the Death Star and gets blown up. That's more realistic. You see, because in Star Wars, the stormtroopers cannot shoot. But in ancient Rome, the force of the military was the most well-trained, heavily armed army the world had ever seen. This rebellion is doomed from the start. And I don't say that hypothetically. I mean, shortly after Jesus died, there was a literal rebellion that was full scale, and Jerusalem was completely wiped out, off the face of the map, destroyed. Rome made an example of the people. Don't rebel. It was hopeless, completely and utterly. But you see, we people, we don't do well with hopelessness. We want to believe there's something we can do in every situation. So what the people did was they fought amongst themselves. They broke off into factions. There were people who did support Rome. There were people that absolutely submitted and said, we should just become Romans. We should just do it. We should just get it over with. Forget being Hebrews. Let's take what crumbs they'll give us and let's do it. And there were mass factions of people who were loyal to the empire. And then there were the terrorists. And they lived with each other. They went to church together. They worked together. And they hated each other. Rome divided the people of Israel. Everybody was angry. No one could trust anybody. Everybody hated each other. Because all of them were hopelessly lost in the face of the empire. They knew it. The empire knew it. And everybody knew it. The world was crazy. And that was everyone. Now, some of why life is complicated for the shepherds is because they were shepherds. And you've probably heard a sermon or 90 about how shepherds are poor. That's a lot of it. Being poor in any era, in any age, in any nation, at any point is always bad. But you see, it's not just poverty that was the problem with the shepherds. It's not just poverty. Lots of people were impoverished. Only the shepherds had a specific issue with their poverty. And that's this. They took care of sheep. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know how big an ancient flock of sheep was, but I do know one time Jesus told a story about a shepherd with 100 sheep, and nobody laughed and said, what a giant flock of sheep. And or no one said, what a terribly tiny flock of sheep. So let's assume that 100 sheep is a realistic number. I can get my head around 100 sheep, right? Basically like, bigger dogs-ish. Am I picturing sheep right? Basically the size of, your dog. It's like 100 dogs. Right? Except for they're dumber and, less adorable because they're not dogs. Now imagine that you've got to take those 100 sheep somewhere to graze and poop and exist and live because they're animals and they live outside and you're responsible for them. The question is this, hypothetical first century shepherd, where do you take your 100 sheep? And your first inclination is probably to think, well, my land, right? And I'm not sure you've been listening if that was your first inclination. These people are poor. They're impoverished. They could afford the sheep. They can't afford the land. They don't have their own land. They got the sheep. So what do? Well, you go to public lands that maybe nobody owns. Well, the problem is this. A couple of things. Number one, you go there and there's Roman soldiers. Do you really, you've got a stick? Like if a Roman soldier who, I don't know, they don't seem like the nicest of fellows, if they want to mess with you, what are you going to do? Shepherd with a stick and 100 furry, fluffy dogs to deal with? Public land is bad. But then there's also this. Even if you want to stay on public land, you know what sheep are really bad at? I mean, probably a lot of things. Algebra, playing guitar, reading property lines. That's one. You never know whose land you're on. And so what we understand from history is while in the Old Testament, in times where it was a little bit more peaceful, or at least if it wasn't more peaceful, it was at least more hopeful, where the people weren't at each other's throat all the time about everything, Shepherds and sheep were sort of seen as, if not, awesome, at least kind of noble. I mean, the idea that, the Lord is my shepherd, you're not comparing God to something bad, kind of a noble thing. In the New Testament, in the first century, what you see is that flips on its head. And yet Jesus uses the same illustration, but that's because Jesus is the king of irony. In the first century world, people hated shepherds because they saw shepherds as invaders. They were poor. They had to pay taxes they didn't want to pay. They couldn't trust their neighbors or the people going to church with them. They couldn't trust they were on the right side of this debate with the Romans. Everybody hates each other, and now you come along with 100 smelly sheep pooping on my yard. Everybody hated the shepherds. They were seen as leeches. They were seen as drains on decent people. Decent people can take care of their land, and these shepherds are out here coming on my land. They're not decent people. They're invading our land. Everybody hates the shepherds. The shepherds get more trouble and more grief from the Jews and the Romans than anyone else. Which is why this passage of Scripture is sort of neat. Luke chapter 2. The night that Jesus was born, we read this. That night there were shepherds staying in the fields nearby, guarding their flocks of sheep. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared among them, and the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded them. They were terrified. But the angel reassured them, "Don't be afraid. I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David, and you will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth lying in a manger." These shepherds that everybody hates, they are invaders to the Jews. They are pests to the Romans. They're in a world where everybody is angry all the time because of the way that the kings have divvied everything up. They're in a mad, terrifying world. Suddenly an angel shows up, a messenger of God. This is someone speaking for God and says, "A new king is born." That's what the word Christ means. That's what the word Messiah means. And if they had missed it, that word good news, evangelion that we know, word good news here, that's actually a Roman word for a word from the divine Caesar. The angels are mocking Rome and saying, "We have a message of good news. A new king, the Christ you've been waiting on for thousands of years, has been born tonight." And not just that. Oh man, this is great. This is amazing to me. The shepherds that everybody hates, the angel says, "This is how you'll find him," which means, I want you to go find him. God invited the people no one else liked to go see Jesus first. And so they did. And Luke continues by saying they celebrated. They celebrated that night. They spent that night praising God. And they did so because we have to understand, to them, this is not about a holiday. This is about a changing of the world order. You see, kings don't like each other. We'll talk about that when we get to the Herod stuff. Kings don't like each other. Herod's a bad dude, but he's acting rationally. You don't want a new king if you are the old king. For a new king to be born and an angel to be talking about it means to these shepherds, things are going to change because Rome can't stay in power. The Herods can't stay in power. And that means the people won't be so angry. That means the divisions will be healed. That means Israel can be one people again. That means people won't hate them so much. This message was a message of hope. This was my psychiatrist saying, "Okay, here's our plan of attack. Things are going to be okay." They look at it and say, "All right, cool, things are going to be okay." And then a funny thing happened. And by funny, I mean sort of heartbreaking. The next day, they woke up and nothing had changed. And a month later, they looked around. Nothing had changed. And a year later, they took stock of their world, and nothing had changed. And 5 years in, they probably started thinking, did we even see that? Like, were those angels real, or were we just did we just eat some weird mushrooms in that field? And then 10 years later, they were convinced, yeah, definitely the mushrooms. And then 15 years later, they're like, no, man, there's got to be, we saw the baby, right? And then 20 years later, they'd be like, all right, he's 20. He's been an adult for 8 years. If he's going to show up and get rid of Rome, he's 8 years late. And 25 years in, some of them probably started dying because ancient people didn't live too long. And if you were 15, now you're 40. They're poor. They don't have health care. They have terrible nutrition. And by 30 years in, there's probably just a few left. I mean, they spent 3 decades waiting for Jesus after they saw Jesus. Jesus didn't fix their problems. Jesus didn't fix their world. Jesus didn't overthrow Rome. Jesus didn't overthrow Herod. And anybody who was alive, maybe an old man who maybe hears about this Jesus guy getting baptized and his teaching and his casting out demons and his, the Sermon on the Mount, and maybe he's listening and he's thinking about the miracles and some of the stuff. Man, that doesn't sound like the Messiah to me. I was promised a king. It's the same reason why they were so excited a week before Jesus was crucified, and then they crucified him the next weekend. They were so excited about a king that would overthrow Rome, and then Jesus is like, yeah, that's not me. I'm very different. I am a king, but I'm very different. So they killed him. The shepherds in that Christmas story. I don't know what I'm ruining something here. But when we imagine them, we need to include the idea, the fact, that they went back to their fields for the next 3 decades and lived lives of disappointing waiting. Waiting for things to be fixed. And it didn't happen because the truth of the matter is that God is not a fix. Faith in Christ does not fix our problems. It just doesn't. And if we try to sell people that, we're selling a lie. And if we try to sell ourselves that, we are setting up ourselves to lose our faith entirely. And so, here we are. A not so jolly Christmas message. So before I go, let's get to one thing. You see, there's something in the background of all this. And the shepherds didn't get it. I know they didn't get it. How could they? They weren't told it. And sometimes we don't get it, and we have been told it. It's not the shepherd's fault. But you see, there is a singular message of Christmas we're going to come back to again and again and again and again and again. The singular message of Christmas is the name of Christ given to Joseph by an angel of Emmanuel. The word Emmanuel means God is with us. Jesus was born to show us God is with us. This is not a new thing, by the way. Jesus has always existed. Therefore, Jesus has always been with us. Therefore, God has always been with us. But in the birth of Christ, we are clearly given a sign and a symbol that God is, will always be, and always has been with us. Which means that faith is not a fixing of our problems, but it starts to add up why we read in the Bible that faith is the belief, the trust in things we don't see. It's the expectation of things before us in the future. You see, we're told again and again in the New Testament that being people of faith are people who trust and hope because we understand that God is with us in every circumstance. Which means this. For the 30 years that the shepherds were waiting, God was with them. And they could always remember that one symbol of hope, and even if it sort of became a bitter memory, even if it became something that they weren't excited about because they were disappointed, God was always with them. And then the people that didn't believe it anymore, God was with them. Because the message of Christmas is an objective truth. God is with us. And that means in 2017, when I had the worst year ever, I wanted to die every day, I was planning ways to do it, God was with me. And this year, when I've had sort of a bad year, but not the worst year, God's with me there too. And I don't know what 2019 is going to look like, but God's going to be with me there too. You see, we've got to understand that Christianity is not about having our problems fixed. Christianity is about God being with us in our problems so that our problems don't define us. And in time, when we understand the scope of who God is, this Roman problem was nothing. The Roman Empire hasn't been a thing for, 1,500 years. Roman oppression towards the church or Christianity or Jewish people hasn't been a thing for, longer than that. God is with us. God is moving history. God is slowly putting the world back together where it is broken. But it's not magic beans. And it's not a quick fix. And for us, as people of faith, we are people that trust that even if our holiday is not so holly or jolly, that God is with us there too. Because God is always with us. This morning, we're our first week of our series called Good News in a World Gone Mad. And our first lesson this holiday season is this. Our faith is not a magic fix for all of our problems, but it is a trust that God is with us in all things. Our faith is not a magic fix for all of our problems, but it is a trust that God is with us in all things. Real quick before we go. Probably would have told this story I did today in one church in the world. And it's this one. I would not have told this story in any other church I know. But I've learned over the years to trust you guys. That you guys are loving, gracious people. That you are people who welcome everybody, including me. So thank you for that. And as we move on here, we need to recognize that this needs to be a place where everyone is always welcome. Always. Because God is always with us. And so we have our differences. And we have our struggles. And at the holidays, they can be a tense time. I don't know who made up this idea this is the best time of the year, because it's not. Maybe the most stressful time of the year? Yeah, absolutely. The time of the year where there's so many expectations put on everybody? Yeah, absolutely. Time of the year where we mourn and grieve the most, maybe? Yep. But at this time of all, this place has to be a safe place. A sanctuary. This needs to not just be a name. This needs to be a sanctuary where people can always come. And you've done that for me, and I appreciate that. And we need to do it for everyone else this holiday season. The musicians coming forward, they've already started. Travis anticipating what I'm going to say. We offer an invitation each and every week. Take God up on his offer of embracing that he is always with us. The Bible teaches us that we do that by repenting and being baptized. We that sounds like one thing or two things. It's just one. We repent. We turn our backs on who we used to be. We say, I want things God's way. When we are baptized, we go down in the water as a symbol of our death to ourselves. And we are raised again to the people that God wants us to be. If you've never made a decision, you got a nice warm baptistry, we can do this anytime, anywhere. You just let me know. We'll do it. If you're already an immersed believer in Christ looking for a perfect church home, wow, is this not it? You just heard the sermon. But we serve a perfect God. And we want to connect, we want to call, we want to cultivate, we want to welcome all people knowing that God is always with us. As we stand and as we sing.